geopolitical analyst Patrick Henningsen. Patrick, thanks for coming on at short notice. Just firstly, what's your reaction to the fact that Julian Assange has been denied bail?
I think it's completely outrageous considering the circumstances of his personal condition, mental and physical. But not only that, just where he stands in reference to other similar cases. So if you look at precedent law, you look at other cases, even in the British courts, there's just plenty of examples that would say, he needs to be granted bail right now. There's terrorists that have been in the exact same position in terms of extradition proceedings who were tagged with ankle bracelets and allowed to go home and, basically have a fairly normal life with their family, although somewhat confined and also tracked by GPS tracker. So, I mean, the arguments made by the judge, Vanessa Baraitser, they simply don't conform with reality. She's characterizing his flight a decade ago from what she calls absconding, but in fact he was legally, according to all international law and treaties recognized by the British government, he was seeking political asylum, which is your right. So what this ruling says, I think one of the big takeaways is that the British court today has basically signaled that it no longer observes this part of international law or treaties on political asylum. I think that is a major shockwave that should be reverberating right now. People need to realize the gravity of that.
OK, it was the US, wasn't it, that opposed this bail application, and they were saying that, look, Assange did go to great lengths to avoid extradition in the first place when he took refuge at the Ecuadorian embassy, and he was there for 7 years. So, why should we believe that he would adhere to any bail conditions?
Well, again, this is all about language and reframing. And of course, this is the universe, the ecosystem of legalese in the courts, and it depends how you characterize it. I think the Assange legal team, from the beginning, from last winter, when these proceedings began at Woolwich Crown Court and Belmarsh Prison, they made an absolutely convincing case, really adhering to all international treaties and laws, and the U.S. prosecution has sought to undermine that at every turn, and appears to have been really supported by the judge and Vanessa Baraitser in their views. So, I mean, you can make the argument from the U.S. prosecution, and that's their job, is to make that argument, and to not, their client is the U.S. Department of Justice. Of course, they want to keep him on ice and have him rendered to the United States, but it simply doesn't conform with precedents in past British decisions with other similar cases. And nor does it conform, really, if you look at the genealogy of this case, with international norms. And we constantly are told that it's a rules-based international order, but it seems those rules seem to be only applying to certain people at certain times, and really at the pleasure of whoever is really, presiding as the most powerful actors on the international stage. In this case, that's clearly the United States and its partner in the special relationship, Britain.
What I think many of his supporters will find strange is that on Monday, the case for blocking extradition was all about Julian Assange's health. And, and the judge actually said, look, I believe he's a suicide risk if he's in prison. And yet today he goes back to a high security prison.
Well, quite right. You've illustrated the point perfectly. Not only that, on top of what you've just said there, which is a very valid argument, and certainly it's one that the defense is making. The fact that under the guise of COVID-19, under the atmosphere of the pandemic, there are no visitation rights right now, I believe, for Belmarsh Prison. I may be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure last time I checked, that's been suspended. So he will not be able to see his family in the near future. For the foreseeable future. So, I mean, there's that, plus, certainly there'll be appealing again. Then there's the issue of, will he have access to his legal team, which he has been denied access to, proper legal team to prepare for his defense at every turn, really, in the last couple of years. That's also going to continue going forward. Certainly his defense is going to be appealing at every bit of this in terms of legal motions. But yeah, so the health issue, I mean, you have the extenuating circumstances of COVID, and that's going to increase the mental condition that the judge, as you pointed out, is ruling on just yesterday. So I don't understand really how this, how this makes any sense.
It doesn't. And again, you've got a man here who's on remand. I mean, he's not been convicted. He's on remand and he's back in a high security prison.
Well, that's the other thing. This is unprecedented. It's going on now a year and a half unconvicted in a maximum security prison. So again, we're comparing him to serial killers, murderers, terrorists, bombers, things like this. He's definitely been classed in that position. So, from that point of view, the classification, how the court is, how the judge, how the prosecution is framing Julian Assange is that of a high-tech terrorist, is that, as your previous commentator stated just a few minutes ago, and also that WikiLeaks is framed as a hostile foreign intelligence actor. And indeed, the prosecution just this morning brought up the point and made hay about the fact that WikiLeaks had supposedly aided Edward Snowden in his flight from Hong Kong, eventually to asylum in Russia, and somehow that factored in as an argument. So you can see the U.S. is, trying to push all of these sort of things that really have no bearing on the actual decision or how the court was going to decide today, but they threw everything in the kitchen sink in order to create this monster. Again, so not much has changed, really. That's really the sad parts about the decision today is there's, the ball hasn't moved that much down the field in terms of Assange's defense and also in terms of how the media is framing him. I mean, there has been some positive coverage in terms of a lot of people coming out, high-level liberal left-wing journalists and editors and people that were normally silent on this for a long time. They've come out in his defense recently. Some papers like The Guardian have broken ranks and finally said, no, he's probably not good for him to be extradited to the United States. But besides that, the general framing of him by the legal system hasn't changed. And so he's being treated as such, as he's been labeled, as a terrorist, WikiLeaks as a hostile foreign intelligence actor, when in fact they're pretty much changing their proper classification, which of course in a normal setting would be a press outlet, would be a member of the Fourth Estate. He would be a publisher and a journalist, and then would be afforded all of the rights under that title. By the law that's recognized throughout history, but that's not happening. And so this is why we're in the situation we're in.
Yeah, and we're also in an indefinite period of time, because how long will it take before an appeal will be heard? Then how long will that appeal take? All the while, Assange is sat where he was, for the last 2 years, and probably on Monday he was thinking to himself, I could actually walk free within a couple of days. But all that's been removed again. Psychologically, it must be torture for him.
Sure. It absolutely is. And not only that, but again, the court, of course, the U.S. prosecution, but the British court is viewing his time in the Ecuadorian embassy as absconding, as sort of an illegitimate attempt at asylum. And quite amazingly and unprecedentedly, the government of Ecuador reversed their decision, which is clearly documented. It's fairly well proven under political pressure. There's no really argument that happened. So, I mean, he does qualify as a political prisoner under so many different bits of evidence. And not only that, the UN, the Special Rapporteur on Torture, has weighed in, has documented, has ruled multiple times that his time in the Ecuadorian embassy should be viewed as arbitrary detention. And again, the last 18 months of his stay in Belmarsh is an extension of that, in fact, even harsher detention. And really, he's unconvicted. He's, like you said, he's indefinitely on remand. That's completely unprecedented for someone who's, playing the role that he's playing in reality, which is journalist and a publisher, but has been reclassified through language and reframing as something else, as a national security threat, as a terrorist, as a flight risk in that sense. So if he was a terrorist, he was a bomber, and he did, was guilty of some terrorist offense somewhere And, you were in this situation, and, there were actual lives that have been lost and so forth. And he was deemed to be if this was another person, you could see how these arguments could be valid from the U.S. prosecution. But in fact, in the case of Julian Assange, they're not. Nobody can make a sane argument that they would be. So I think that a lot of this is happening within the bubble, within the confine, within what increasingly looks like a vacuum of reality within the legal system that doesn't really adhere to what the realities are outside the court. And I blame part of this on the mainstream media, who have been basically absent without leave for years on his case.
And that has changed, Patrick. I'll just intervene there because, if you're reading the newspapers, just go back 5 years, 6 years, there was a lot of support for Julian Assange, and then it just changed.
Yeah, no, if you go back 10 years, massive support, and it changed. And the reason it changed is clear. It's because of the case that was sort of what looks to be a fabricated sex crime case against Assange, which was documented now. There was some degree of collusion between the Swedish prosecutor's office and the British CPS. So, I mean, that's been leaked and that's documented now. So there was some coordination there. That didn't need to be dragged on, but the fact that sex case dragged on turned the entire left wing, turned the feminists against Julian Assange, a lot of journalists, newspapers, and people just didn't want to touch him. In fact, some of the people who are defending him now, and it's great that they have stepped up, but just 2 years ago they weren't defending him. Some of even the high-profile people, because they felt it wasn't safe, because they didn't want the ridicule from their peers and political cohort. So they all backed off. And then obviously the worse the situation got in Belmarsh, a lot of those organizations, which one could name, they did step forward and they did sort of say, okay, this is a serious case. I think they did that because when Sweden finally dropped the sex case, then it was kind of a green light for a lot more support to come flooding in. And thank God it did, because, I don't think he would have got the decision on Monday that even the decision that the Judge Baraitser ruled, I don't think that would have happened if not for the second wave of support that's come for Julian Assange really in the last 12 months since the Woolwich proceedings. So, that's a testament to every single person who's come out to support him. They've got an incredible grassroots support base. Have come out really. Some people have been out there for years, candlelight vigils in front of the Ecuadorian embassy, right their way through to now. It's absolutely unbelievable. It's a real grassroots movement. And if there hadn't been the pandemic last spring and lockdown policies, you would really see some serious crowds outside these proceedings right now. I mean, it would be thousands.
I mean, there is. Sorry, I was going to just jump in there, Patrick, and say there is a quick way out, and that would be for a pardon from Trump before, January the 20th?
Sure. And this is a big question that a lot of people have. Is that going to happen? Is that realistic politically? I mean, that would be sort of a parting shot from Donald Trump should his election challenges fail this week and next week. He's making a last stand on that regard. That would be sort of a parting shot to the establishment. But, of course, he would be roundly ridiculed and probably forever branded as aiding a Russian agent if he went and did that, unless he's willing to take that hit. I don't know if that's likely or not, if that's possible, if he's going to do that. But certainly that would be a solution to everything. But that would really set the national security establishment, probably large swaths of the Pentagon establishment, maybe some of his own support base within that establishment could possibly turn on him, not because if it's a right or wrong issue, it's because they themselves, even people within the U.S. Permanent state, as it were, in Washington, a lot of them have been brainwashed by the same media misinformation about Julian Assange over the last few years that the general public has. A lot of the senators and congressmen in the U.S., their views on Assange and WikiLeaks really reflects their public, their constituents' views, which is really determined by mainstream media coverage. So you can see the cycle of propaganda, the cycle of reframing, as it were, on this issue in the public, it's going to be reflected in the legislature as well. And so that's how the U.S. consensus
Patrick,
works.
look, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Really good to get your insight, though, into all of this. That was Patrick Henningsen, geopolitical analyst. Thanks for coming on.
Okay.